There was a topic change for tonight, as many people might know, but in some ways it maintains the premise. Like, this is still in some ways a halacha shiur, but the premise that halacha contains deep wisdom and values that help us navigate being humans in the world, that's kind of this also. And we'll be doing that today, but with a rather obscure area of Hilchot Avilut. And we'll get to that in a minute. But before that, I just wanted to say that the shiur is being delivered by me in memory of the people who were murdered at Tree of Life or the Simcha congregation in Pittsburgh on Shabbat. And their names were Joyce Feinberg, Richard Gottfried, Rose Mallinger, Jerry Rabbanit, Cecil Rosenthal, David Rosenthal, Bernice Simon, Sylvan Simon, Daniel Stein, Melvin Wax, and Irving Younger. In moments like these, there's a lot of pressure to speak out, especially if you're like a public person, you're a journalist, or you're the mayor, or you're something. Like, everyone talks. And there's a very good instinct behind that. We all have the famous, like, Martin Niemöller poem in our head of first they came for so-and-so, and I did not speak out because I was not so-and-so. And that's a call for voice and a call for action. And action certainly requires voice, and the situation requires action, so that all then requires voice. But the situation also requires grief, and grief requires silence. So this shiur is an argument for some silence. And specifically, we'll be talking about the prohibition of she'ilat shalom, of greeting people who are in mourning. I want to first frame our discussion around a poem by the Victorian Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She lived from 1806 to 1861. She grew up in a very religious Christian house, and she was quite ill for much of her relatively short life. I tell you, hopeless grief is passionless, that only men incredulous of despair, half-taught in anguish through the midnight air, beat upward to God's throne in loud access of shrieking and reproach. Full of desertness in souls as countries lie silent bare under the blenching, vertical eye glare of the absolute heavens. Deep-hearted man, express grief for thy dead in silence like to death, most like a monumental statue set in everlasting watch and moveless woe, till itself crumble to the dust beneath. Touch it, the marble eyelids are not wet. If it could weep, it could arise and go. We'll come back to that poem at the end, but I wanted to plant it early on. So the question is, why is the Avel, why is the mourner prohibited in greetings? What is the purpose of his silence? And I want to argue that there are 4 different purposes that all are played out through this obligation. And those are labeled A, B, C, and D in the source sheet for those following along. But we'll start with the kind of original grief silence, which is, of course, Aaron. When Aaron's sons are killed because they brought an unholy fire, a foreign fire, to the tabernacle, Moshe says to Aaron, Hu asher diber Hashem le'emor b'krovai ekadish v'al pnei kol ha'am ekaved vayidom Aaron. So then Moses says to Aaron, this is what the Lord meant when he said, through those who are near me I will show myself holy, and before all the people I will be glorified. And Aaron was silent. That is Aaron's response. Moshe tries to make sense of what has happened, and Aaron is silent. And that silence then becomes one of the models for silence in the face of tragedy. So the first piece of this puzzle is that silence helps you feel sad. It allows you, meaning when something sad happens, there's often, oh, I won't experience the sadness because I'll just stay busy. I'll just do a million things. I'll run around. I'll go to work, or I'll talk to people and I'll be distracted. And no, when we command people to be silent, we say, be silent because you're supposed to be sad right now, and in order for you to feel sad right now, you need to be silent. So a few sources in that direction. In Tractate Moed Katan, which is where we find almost all of the discussions that relate to mourning, we have the following. Avel asur b'sheilat shalom deka'amar le'rachmana le'echazkel ha'anek dom. A mourner is prohibited in salutations and greetings because the merciful one said to Ezekiel, sigh in silence. So I brought you those verses from Ezekiel that the Gemara is talking about. We'll just read them in English. The word of the Lord came to me, mortal, with one blow I am about to take away from you the delight of your eyes, meaning his wife. Yet you shall not mourn or weep, nor shall your tears run down. Sigh, but not aloud. That's our verse. Hanikdom. Make no mourning for the dead. Bind on your turban. Put your sandals on your feet. Do not cover your upper lip or eat the bread of mourners. So I spoke to the people in the morning, and at evening my wife died, and on the next morning I did as I was commanded. So Ezekiel is commanded to be silent. And Rashi on that verse says, Hanek hitmakmek bishtika. And in the Jastrow dictionary, and the reason to look at the Jastrow, which is a Talmud dictionary, is because what I'm interested in is why the Talmud what the Talmud is hoping to get out of this verse. But the Rashi here says, to be crushed in silence. So to be crushed by silence is something like what Rashi is trying to get at. So the silence is meant to be crushing, meaning it's meant to make you feel something. God says to Ezekiel, be quiet. And Rashi explains that's meant to be a kind of a crushing silence. And then the Gemara in Moed Katan expands that to all mourners. Every mourner is prohibited in greetings because of the commandment of God to Ezekiel. Yeah.
But the rest of the verses is telling him to not mourn. So why are we not saying that mourners have to do this? This is what mourners would not be doing.
And it's especially a good question because the Gemara does that, meaning he learns the opposite from Ezekiel in every way but this one. So the sense is, I think, that the Gemara gets to is that is like Hanek Dom, that's the only thing you're supposed to do the way normal mourners do, and then the negative command comes right after that. Aval lo ta'asa, all the other stuff that mourners do. What?
There's also things he's not supposed to do before that Hanek Dom.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I don't know. But certainly the Talmud does that, but I don't have a good explanation for how or why. And it's possible that it's even inside, and I'm just not holding anymore. Okay. And similarly, like in terms of this like sense of like what is the purpose of silence, so the Shulchan Aruch here says, a mourner is prohibited in happiness. Aval asur b'simcha, lefichach lo yikach tinok b'cheiko kol shiv'ah, shema yavo lidei schuk. So a mourner is prohibited from joyful activities. Therefore, you should not take a child to his lap for all of Shiva in case he comes to laugh. That there's meant to be in mourning sadness, and if there's like a noise or an activity that will make you happy, you should purposefully avoid it. So as part of this like larger system of avelut, silence is one of a whole matrix that comes together to push towards sadness and to create an environment in which you can like fully experience sadness. Okay, so that was purpose 1, sadness. Okay, purpose 2. So we're going to get more into the details of greeting here. So we have a Baraita in Tractate Moed Katan 21a, Tanu Rabbanan, Avel Gimel Yamim Rishonim Asur B'Sheilat Shalom. For the first 3 days of his Shiva, he is prohibited from any kind of greeting. Mishlosha v'ad shiv'ah, mishiv ve'eno shoel. From the 3rd to the 7th day, he can respond, but he shouldn't ask. So So he shouldn't, if someone says to him, hello, he can say hello, but he shouldn't begin that interaction. And after Shiva is over, all these restrictions are lifted, says this Braita, and he can kind of go on his normal greetings. So then the Gemara raises a challenge question. Is it true that those first 3 days are prohibited in greeting? Vatanya, we have a Braita that talks about the death of the sons of Rabbi Akiva. Vatanya Maseh v'mitu banav shel Rabbi Akiva nichnesu kol Yisrael v'yispitum hesped gadol. And all the Jews entered to eulogize them with a lot of eulogies, or great eulogies. B'sha'at b'tziratan amad Rabbi Akiva al safsal gadol. When all the people were leaving, Rabbi Akiva got up on a big bench. Amar achinu beit Yisrael. He says, "My brothers, all of Israel, shivu afilu shnei banim chatanim menucham hu b'shvil kavod she'asitem v'im b'shvil Akiva batem harei kamo Akiva b'shuk el kach amartem torat Elohav b'libo." So he says, our brothers, the house of Israel, listen, even had my 2 sons been grooms, I would have been consoled on account of the honor that you all have shown them by coming here to comfort me. And if you came to console for the sake of like something about me, well, there's lots of people like me in the marketplace, and you don't all come for that. Rather, you came out of a sense of honor for the Torah, and because you showed honor to the Torah, you should have a great reward. And then, so that was a challenge because, right, Akiva greeted all these people who came to give respect to his sons. And the Gemara says, no, kvod Rabbi Mishani, no, because it's different because he was showing respect for the public. But then the Gemara goes on to quote another piece from the Braita and ask another question about it. So Migimel va'ad zayin, from the 3rd day until the 7th day, Meshiv ve'ino shoel. Mikan ve'ilach shoel Meshiv kedarko. So from the 3rd to the 7th day, he responds but doesn't initiate. And from there onwards, he responds and initiates as normal. But then the Gemara says, wait, but we have a contradicting Braita. Motzeh chavero avel. If you come across your friend and he is a mourner, b'toch lamed yom, within the 30 days, medaberi mo tanchunim, you say to him words of comfort, ve'eno shoel bishlomo, and you should not greet him, you shouldn't ask about his well-doing. La'achar lamed yom shoel bishlomo, ve'eno medaberi mo tanchunim, and after 30 days, you should ask how he's doing, and you should no longer comfort him. And then it has like kind of a side point. So if his wife died and he married a new woman, you shouldn't go into his house and say comforting things to him because that would be offensive to the new wife. But if you find him in the marketplace, you should like quietly and kind of to the side ask him, say words of comfort. So we seem to have this contradiction of, well, in this case, doesn't it say from the end of Shiva you can speak freely with people, and then in this other case we have all this stuff. Oh, within 30 days, you should only speak to him words of comfort. And so Rav Idi bar Avin comes to explain, Hu shoel b'shlom achirim. No, after the Shiva, he can ask about how other people are doing. Sha'achirim shurim b'shalom. Because other people are at peace. But achirim ein sholim bishlomo, other people cannot extend greetings to him, shu eino sharui b'shalom, because he, the mourner, is not at peace. Okay, so that was the main point of this, which is to say that it's not just that silence leaves space for sadness; it leaves space for emotional responses. Like, yeah, I'm not at peace, and that's okay. Like, you don't have to pretend to be at peace. When someone says, peace be upon you, you don't have to be like, yes. Right? You don't have to say like, yes, peace is upon me. And by saying you don't need to greet people, you don't need to respond to people, like, you don't, like, people shouldn't be asking you, is peace upon you? They shouldn't say, shalom aleichem, because they shouldn't expect that of you. It's not an appropriate thing to expect. You should be allowed to be silent because you're allowed an emotional space within that. That silence gives you the space to have all kinds of feelings that are not necessarily what's scripted by our language. I had a friend from the Czech Republic in college, and one of his main negative feelings about Americans is that we greet each other by saying, "How you doing?" And the answer to "how you doing" has to be good. And his sense was like, that's nonsense. Like, people are not doing good, and you have this scripted, "How you doing?" Great. "How you doing?" Good. And he felt really strongly like it was a deep flaw in American culture. And in Judaism, it's built into our culture, "Shalom Aleichem," peace upon you. But the answer for this person is allowed to be, no, it's not. And the silence that we give to a mourner in this moment enables that for him. It allows him, it gives him space. It says, yeah, don't even try, don't respond. You could not be in peace. And actually, like, Rav Idi Bar Avin's statement isn't like, oh, he might not be in peace. It's, he's for sure not in peace. Peace is certainly not with him, right? It's not even like, oh, well, maybe, I don't know, so let me like do a dance of how should I interact with this person. It's like, assume not. And then maybe over time it will come back, and we'll make our way back to a situation where we can ask and respond about in peace, but not yet. And we see basically that same idea it gets brought down almost exactly to the Shulchan Aruch. So Shulchan Aruch says, Mishiv'a ve'ad shloshim, I'm in the underlined part, sho'el b'shlom achirim shem shriim b'shalom. So from Shiva until Shloshim, or from 7 days after the burial until 30 days, you can, the mourner can ask other people, how are they doing? Shehem shriim b'shalom, because they're presumably in a situation of shalom, but in achirim sholim b'shlomo. But others should not ask him about whether he is in a situation of shalom. However, when people ask him, he should, he's allowed, he's permitted to answer. Because like it would be rude not to, and it's very stressful not to, but other people are supposed to know not to ask. So you don't want to, it's like a little bit of a protective stance. Like, someone asks you, you don't have to be like, you don't have to like make a big deal out of it, but people should know not to ask because they should know not to expect that of you. Okay, I think, let's skip that. Yeah. Okay, so that was point B, which is quite different from point A, right? So A was silence forces you to like sit with your feelings and feel them, and it's meant to push you towards sadness, and that's like a very proscriptive, like, you are meant to be sad, and we're going to provide you with tools that will help you to be sad. And this is a little bit softer than that. It's a little bit more like descriptive. Like, this person is probably not in a situation of shalom, and therefore we're not going to make him lie. We're not going to make him, it would be almost disrespectful to assume otherwise, and therefore when you see this person, assume shehu eino sharui b'shalom, assume that he is not in a situation of peace, and don't make him follow the script. But if someone did put you, and you're the mourner, in that situation, feel free to follow the script, so you don't have to like go all into it. And I think that's like a really nice thing that the halacha describes there, and a way of just giving people like emotional space. Like, we have these, as I said before, right? We have these like scripted emotions, and the halacha says like, no, it's not the time for those like scripted positive feelings, and silence provides a space for that. Okay, so the next one is existential space, and this requires us to dig a little bit deeper into what She'ilat Shalom is all about. So this is now C. Okay. So now we're in the Ramah on what we just saw. Okay, so Me'achar she'asur b'She'ilat Shalom, and since you're prohibited in saying and extending greetings, Kol shekin asur laharbot bidvarim. We'll get back to this later, but how much more so you're not supposed to say very much. But as we saw in the Gemara in Moed Katan, and if you do that, and if you're greeting people in order to like honor the public, כגון שרבים באים לנחמו, מותר לומר להם לכו לשלום, לכבוד רבים שרי. So if a lot of people come to bring you comfort, then you're allowed to say like, go home in peace, because that's for the purpose of respecting like the masses. And then the Rama says, "V'yesh makilim ha'idna b'sheilat shalom ha'ava la'achar shloshim." So some people today are really lax with respect to extending a greeting of peace after shloshim, and they're wrong. Ve'in tam lahem, they should not be. Im lo shichloku lomar shezeh ma she'anu noagim lo mikrei sheilat shalom shebiyamehem. And the only reason to explain what they're doing is if the only defense these people can have in their being lax about inquiring about how someone is doing after shloshim, not inquiring, extending a greeting after shloshim would be that they feel that what they're doing is not this kind of technical she'ilat shalom, which is what all of the halachic sources are talking about. So, right, in order to say like, oh yes, I am allowed to say, how's it going? I just can't say shalom aleichem or whatever it is. So what's the difference there? What's the difference? What are you doing when you say shalom aleichem that's different from how's it going? So we see this distinction drawn out in another area of halacha, which we can look at. That's source number C2 here. Okay, so in the morning, you're not supposed to do really much of anything before you daven, and up to and including greeting people. So kivan she'higia zman tefillah, once it's time to daven, asur la'adam la'akdim lepetach chavero litin lo shalom. You're not supposed to like go over to your friend's house in the morning on your way to shul to say hey, or to say shalom. And the reason for that is mishum dishmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu shalom. So the Shulchan Aruch explains that the reason for that is that the name of God is shalom. Aval mutar lomar lo tzafra demare tav. You're allowed to say to him, good morning, sir. So what's the difference? What's the difference between asking in someone's shalom and saying, good morning, sir? Yeah. Thank you.
In the context of tefillah here, this notion that Shemo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shalom suggests that asking shalom is, in a way, putting aside the fact that you should really be saying shalom to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The first responsibility is to begin your day by having this kind of intimate relationship with God, and not sort of invoking God in the moment you're engaging with another person.
Mm-hmm. So when you say to someone shalom, you're creating like this triangulation between yourself, that person, and God, when really like that's not a point in your day for triangulation. That's a point in your day for just you and God. Does anyone have any other impressions? Yeah.
Well, because we were saying earlier, like shalom being like a message of peace. If that's like again imposing on them, like, oh, you're in a state of peace, as opposed to just like good morning, like it's the morning and you can feel however you want to feel.
Mm-hmm. So we're not in Avelut anymore. This is Hilchot Tefillah. So, but I mean, maybe you're cranky because you haven't had your coffee yet. Yeah.
Another possibility is that She'ilat Shalom is the beginning of a conversation. And Tzafra Demari Tav, good morning, is just a greeting.
It's just a
and
greeting.
You can just continue on with your day, so it's not really an interruption in the process.
Right, maybe it's like quicker in some way, right? That would be like a more technical perspective on this. Carly, were you going to say something?
No, but I can.
Please.
One thing that comes to mind is kind of like we were saying before, shalom is a very, you and Hashem and the other person kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's drawing a connection as opposed to like, good morning, sir, where it's very one-on-one based. And like I'm trying to like think of it in today's words, but like, hey, how are you? How's it going? What's new in life? Is very different from like, good morning.
Right, or even like, hi.
Right, so like, you've got the personal greeting of shalom, which is much more a deeper level, if that makes sense, as opposed to like, good morning, sir, or like, what up?
Right.
You don't get that same sort of connection. So
Yeah.
it's kind of allowing them that opportunity a step back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost funny the way that it's being described here, that we're ever allowed to say shalom. So like we're ever allowed to greet another person with God's name. And it's like something about tefillah of like, okay, we've had our morning conversation with God that then allows us to use God's name to greet people.
Mm-hmm.
So like the way that's described here, like it's surprising that we're even able to do that almost.
Yeah. Where is it? He says, right, and here he says, "Ve'im hitchil levarich habrachot ein lachush kol kach." Like if you've already started saying brachot, somehow that like mitigates it somehow. Because maybe, so you could say it in all the different ways. Like one is like, you've already started davening, so even if you're like, hey, how's it going, right, in Carly's world, then you're not going to get distracted because you've already started. In the like triangulation, like who are you actually talking to? Well, you've already started your conversation with Hashem. So like you're bringing this person now in, at least you like have your priorities straight. And then it was going to tie into what you were just saying, but now it escaped me. This is too
I like it. It's funny that we can even ever use say.
Oh, right.
Use God's name.
Right, but you would think that actually, like in a context of tefillah, it becomes more appropriate than to use God's name. That was the connection. But to grab onto what you're saying, right? It's surprising that we can ever use God's name, but when we can use God's name to inquire about someone else, the retraction of that in avelut, I want to argue, is meaningful. That it's not just, oh, this person isn't in a state of peace, let's give them emotional space, but once peace becomes a stand-in also for God, it's a description of the person you're engaging with in relationship with God. Right? So it assumes a triangulation between you, the other person, and God, which when someone is in avelut, we maybe don't assume about them. Or we maybe assume, one second, or maybe or you could say, well, we still assume that they're in a relationship with God, but that their relationship is actually changed. Their relationship with God is not in a relationship of shalom. Their relationship with God is maybe in a relationship of hamakom, or in a relationship of dayan, but like as... I guess the translation we like to give for makom is omnipresent or something like that, and dayan as judge. So those are things that we sort of say are required to say to mourners. We say, may the omnipresent comfort you, or we say, or the mourner says, blessed is God, the true judge, or who judges, truthfully. There's a lot of interesting things bound up in that. But we don't expect that the mourner can interact with God as shalom, and we don't force that on mourners. And that feels like another very powerful way of this silence, this prescribed silence, as not just about, oh, be sad, but as a like, there's a lot of feelings that you might be feeling right now, and the halacha is going to give you space to like have and explore and navigate all of those, and not over a short amount of time. Meaning, we started out with 3 days, moved to 7, moved to 30, moved to even past 30, where really people are supposed to be careful about how they greet you, because all of your relationships with this death and this moment of grief have been thrown into flux and into questions, and we're going to give you space for those questions. That was, yeah, Carly.
So forgive me for I don't know how the trends of this started or what the story is, but I feel like when you say to someone shalom and it's a conversation starter as opposed to good morning sir, when you say shalom the next question is how are you doing, if a person's knee-jerk reaction is Baruch Hashem, you know, it's they're praising Hashem when really they might not feel it, and they might have like a real cognitive dissonance, the fact that it's such a knee-jerk reaction, like thank God things are great, but in this case it's not for them. So it's kind of allowing them to not say it, you know, a bracha necessarily, if they're not going to have a heart into it.
Yeah, right. Linda?
No, I mean, they're really not okay to say Baruch Hashem because they're not okay.
Right. Yeah, and it gives people an out. Okay, so one last thing, which is that, one last piece of this, and then there's more after, is that there's also this sense from these same texts that silence is in and of itself of value. So we saw the Rashi on what Hashem commands to Ezekiel, which was like be crushed in your silence, like hitmakmik, like have your silence should be painful. And the Mitzudat David says no. Stop groaning, don't groan so much. Which is just be quiet, just quiet. There's nothing you're not gonna have any experience in your quietness. There's not gonna be some outcome. There's just a value in silence. It is a value in and of itself. It's not that it causes you suffering. It's not that it gives you space. It's not that emotional space. It's not that it gives you existential space. You're just be quiet. And it seems like this same idea comes out. The Rambam he draws a kal v'chomer. So he says, im b'sheilat shalom, I'm in the underlined part of the Rambam, im b'sheilat shalom ne'esar ba'avel. So if greeting the mourner is prohibited, kal v'chomer, how much more so, shehu asur laharbot dvarim, that he shouldn't talk very much, v'lischok, and he shouldn't laugh, shene'amar dom, as the pasuk says, as the Kadosh Baruch Hu said to Ezekiel, be quiet. And the Rambam continues, lo yachuz tinok biyado shelo v'yanu lidei schok. And you shouldn't hold a child in his arms because it shouldn't bring him to laughter. So it's not like, oh, Sheilat Shalom, greeting people because there's all this meaning wrapped up in greeting. It's no, greeting, how much more so any other kind of discussion. Like if greeting here is the kal to the chomer of other discussion. It's the like lenient thing from which we learn the stronger thing. Like, oh, a greeting could be "Good morning, sir," and now I've moved on, right? It could be such a small little thing, and if I'm prohibited in that small little thing, then of course longer discussion or any kind of frivolous conversation, longer discussion and especially frivolous conversation would be the chomer, would be the like how much more so should you not engage in that. But drawing this kal v'chomer, there's a real tension between this Rambam and what I was saying like even a minute ago about Sheilat Shalom being something specifically about Shalom, it being some inherent thing to what peace means, the expectations of what your experience of peace, of God as peace. The Rambam wouldn't, or at least here, like in drawing this kal v'chomer, like isn't buying into any of that. He's saying it's all just even minimal talking, let alone how like more talking than that. Yeah, Ali.
Talk about like Shiva in the context of this, because it seems like Shiva is like sort of the opposite. Like, if you really should be in silence, then like why would you have like this thing where all these people are coming to your house to come see you and talk to you? You know what I mean? Like it seems like it's the opposite of what he's saying.
Shiva has become about talking. In the Talmud's mind, the Talmud says there's like and I think it's a Gemara, and it's either in Brachot or Megillah. You'll remember. You're gonna tell me. Whether it's like the Tov Sheba, this is that. And there's like a long list of like good in this environment is this thing, and the Tov Sheba Beit Ha'avel, the good thing in a house of a mourner is shtika, is silence. And that Shiva in the eyes of the Talmud is a silent experience. You just go in, you sit together in silence and solidarity, share in the suffering of the other, but it's become this time where we share stories and talk and laugh and remember. And in the eyes of the Talmud, that is, and I think the Rambam would probably share that is not what they're imagining, especially not in the first 3 days. And even, meaning the Talmud even suggests like, it's not necessarily right to visit a mourner in the first 3 days. Like that's when things are really raw and it can be really painful time, and that it's much better to come after those first 3 days when the suffering's a little bit less and there's a shift towards comfort within the arc of Shiva after the first 3 days. Yeah, Judith.
This really resonates with me. And because to me, Shiva is a silent time.
Mm-hmm.
And I have walked out of Shiva houses when you've got all the storytelling and people showing videos, and I've just walked out because it's such for me, it raises all kinds of painful emotions. And my parents would talk about how you don't go to a Shiva house after the burial. You don't go on the first day unless you are intimate with that group. And they would often, if they were intimates, people, they would go in the afternoon when it was quiet. And if the person sitting shiva wanted to talk, they could have a conversation. But it was always very, very quiet. And that's certainly not what happens in many situations now.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, the discussion of the expectation of silence. For me, it's very reassuring.
What if the people who are visiting a Shiva house make it into a party?
That is inappropriate behavior on behalf of Shiva colors.
And the people who are sitting Shiva are feeling sad because they're doing what they're doing, and
Yeah.
I mean, what are you supposed to do?
Ask a friend to kick the people out. But it's very difficult,
So
and it's
when
not
it's
an
a whole
unusual
group, when it's
situation.
a whole group, when they just take over, and they take over different rooms of the house, the dining room, the kitchen, blah, 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 and they have a party.
I'm
and the
sorry
person
that that's been your
Who's
experience.
deceased is never talked about, never mentioned. The people who are sitting Shiva are never even recognized. They're there to party.
I'm sorry.
I mean, but it happens all the time. I think I've seen this before, not only in my own circumstances, but it seems that the American way is to have a party after the burial.
It's something that other people, that has not been the way of the Orthodox community in America, and it's very hard when that happens. Yeah. John?
I kind of add, I went to a shiva recently, and there were signs that said it is our tradition, do not ask questions of or ask anybody to do anything who is in mourning. So I think, kind of to address both of you, if you're intimate, put a sign up and tell people what you want. Well, express it to somebody else who will write it down and put that up. It's within your right. I went to a shiva recently, and it was hundreds of people, and it was a scary party, and I didn't feel comfortable, so I left.
It was a party?
That was a huge party. And I wasn't in a party mood, but her parents were okay with it, so.
Was it right after, do you know?
Possibly about 40
Let's continue this
minutes.
conversation after. Eva, were you
No, I mean, I think it's kind of similar to what you were saying about your friend's comment about Americans. Like, I think there was this discomfort with, like, being unhappy or, like, trying to always make something, like, ignore the, I don't know, alphabet in the room, ignore it and pretend we're happy, pretend things are good, pretend we're having fun, pretend, like, there's a lot of that, I think.
Yeah, and I think Judaism, it's very rare that you can say Judaism says anything, but I think in this instance, it really does. Meaning Judaism says grief is grief, grief has ripples. Grief, I didn't bring this here, but that Hilchot Avelut is beautiful and fascinating, and a lot of it isn't fully observed anymore, but the Talmud has this idea that if you're a family member, if you live in the house with other mourners, you should observe the mourning rituals along with them. And if you're in the room of a mourner, you should be mourning with them. You should take off your shoes with them, or we observe mourning for more than just the 7 relatives. When important people die, you saw this a little bit when Rav Aaron Lichtenstein died. A lot of his students tore their clothes, tore kriya over the passing of their teacher. That it's not only, oh, my parent died. It's someone who was important to me died, and that, or in this instance, something happened in our nation and in American Judaism that rocks us, and the Chod Avelut have this wisdom and ways of responding, and that don't craft and tomorrow you'll be fine. It's the opposite reaction. It's a reaction of tomorrow you will not be fine, and actually the first thing to do is to work towards not being fine. Actually put effort into not being fine, because then maybe someday you'll be fine again. But if the first instinct is exactly as Ava's saying, if the first instinct is to be like, oh, everything is great, you're never gonna, or like it'll be a lot harder for you to get to fine. And it's very, like in America, this is very countercultural, but I think it's essential. Yeah, Carly.
I have kind of a stupid question. I apologize.
No such
With the laws of don't greet, don't say shalom, all those things, do those start when you first find out that somebody passes away? Do they start at burial? Do they start at Shiva? When does this happen?
So Shiva starts at burial. And so most of the laws of like mourning, the laws of Avelut start at burial. The laws of, or if like the body is, you'll never get it back. That when you give up on any prospect of retrieving the body, one of those options. So either burial or like impossibility of retrieval. And before that, you're in a state of aninut, which the anticipation is that state will be very, very short. But that's like a crazy, for another time, but that's like a very intense and very crazy state. And actually, meaning that was on the mind heavily because there's an article that my friend is writing, she's in Pittsburgh now, that's going to come out in Tablet tomorrow, about how the FBI and the Chavra Kadisha were working together because the FBI wanted to leave the bodies for as long as possible to help their investigation. But as long as the bodies are not interred, you're in owning. You're in this like weird like half state where like you're not supposed to make brachot and you don't do a lot of mitzvot and like all sorts of like joy and happiness are like prohibited to you, but also like lots of things that are not usually permitted to you are now permitted to you, and it's like for another time we can look at those halachot together. They're fascinating and strange and twilight-y, but right. So that was like part of the difficulty is like the Torah says like bury on that day, like as soon as possible, ki kavor tiparenu, like, and so when that like conflicts with like the security of the American Jewish community, like what do you do? And that was like the question this week, in Pittsburgh in a very like harsh, scary kind of way. Yeah.
There's been a lot on the internet about what's been going on in Pittsburgh, and part of that the FBI and the Shomrim and Tahara, and it's been interesting because I think one of the things that's happening is that the non-Jewish community is getting a sense of Jewish tradition, because in the non-Jewish community, in the Christian world, burial wouldn't happen until like the next weekend.
With enough time to print out T-shirts with the person's face on it.
Yeah, and you go to some of the funerals and it's a celebration, and it's very, very different. And it's been interesting on the news to have people talk about Shabbat, and I mean just the terminology that they're using, that non-Jewish reporters are using. It's as if they're getting a lesson.
They are.
What goes on in a Jewish family, but now it's Pittsburgh being the family.
Yeah. In a way that's beautiful, I think, for the most part.
Have you ever heard, I don't know if it's a custom among just different people or whatever, of people doing a l'chaim at the Shiva house? Did you ever hear of such a thing?
It's probably prohibited.
I would think that, but it's among people who you would think would be very well, or are sometimes learned.
Well, I'm not here to judge anybody.
No, but I mean, have you ever heard of such a thing?
Not in Orthodox circles, but.
Okay.
And so I'll just finish up this section by saying that the Kal V'chomer of the Rambam, the how much more so of the Rambam makes its way into the Ramah, which we've seen this already, but right, he has the same thing. Since he's forbidden to extend the greeting of peace, so much the more is he forbidden to indulge in conversation. So just to say that silence has this value in and of itself. It's not about creating space for something else. It's not about feeling a certain way. It's that like silence, following in the ways of Aaron and in the ways of God's commandment to Ezekiel, is inherently valuable. And I think if we turn back to Browning, that's sort of what she's getting at. I think her sense is that silence helps us to helps us to kind of stay mobile and eventually regrow hope. So she says it starts like a statue. The statue is kind of still and sad, but over time, that statue degrades, it crumbles. And she says if it were alive, then it would rise and go. It's the kind of grief that's passionate. So it grieves, but not too loudly, and it progresses in the way that our Avelut progresses. So the first day of Shiva is different from the first 3 days of Shiva, and from that's different from the rest of Shiva, which is different from Shloshim, which is different from the year. And eventually, right, we go outside, eventually we start talking to people again. That because we've had this time for silence, the statue that is the silence can eventually crumble, and then ultimately, potentially arise and go. And I think that's what I would argue for in this moment, that there was a jump from this happened to action and a real push for action. But one of the things that I've been noticing, and this is not necessarily a critique, because I think if the Jewish community didn't act, then other communities would act for us. But a lot of the action feels like not helpful, and we were hearing that coming out of Pittsburgh, meaning a lot of people were driven to go to Pittsburgh, and every clergy Jewish leader listserv that I'm on was hearing from Pittsburgh, do not come here, it's not helping, we can't host you, we can't feed you, there's no one who wants a stranger walking into their home right now, please do not come. And there was such an instinct to jump up and go and do and say that they felt inundated in a way that possibly that's difficult. That's difficult that was difficult for them to handle. And so I think what Browning and Hilchot Avelut remind us is that first there's grief, and first there's silence, and first there's a non-interactive state that is both inherently valuable, gives us space to explore our emotions, gives us space to have a reckoning with all that's going on and to recognize that the world has changed, and then from there to mobilize either back to normal life or back to whatever comes next, back to a world in which maybe we can contemplate greeting people with the name of Hashem as peace, because maybe we'll once again find ourselves believing in that possibility. And then eventually that possibility will be what provides the zeal that's needed for real, meaningful, helpful action. But that during Shiva there's time for Hanik Dom and for the Hitmakbik Bishtika of Rashi, and for us to just feel the difficulty and challenge and hurt and grief of this moment. And that is, I would say, right now. And that eventually there'll be a time for other things, but right now that's enough, and that's okay. That's good. People have questions, I'm happy to stick around. I think there's also a moment for music a little bit. I know Judith was telling me she just went to a music course today because it helps. And I think music, as the opposite of silence, also opens up emotional spaces that can be helpful. So if you want to sing with me right now, we can do that. I'll leave that as you.